Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen who are going to join this space. This is a follow up of the first space, as I said, which would regard the post Avdiivka march. There will be a third one on Tuesday. That one will be in great part based on the work of our friend Bibi. Mickey, which has done a whole thread of it, overlooking the situation north of Ugledar. I said that that one was going to be a bit of a wow thread. The groundwork done by Bibi is amazing, and once again, I'm going to follow up on that and get a lot more detailed. Why? Because attacking Ugledar by north is going to be an absolute shit show, and whatever you saw for Avdiivka, guys, you better clinch your buttocks because it's going to be a lot more costly given the situation at hand and the topography generally. But this is for Tuesday. Now we are looking at the part two. The part two actually relies, if you were here for the part one, so basically Ocheretine. Ocheretine is so far, well, let's call it as it is, the easiest way, given the progression that the Russians have been uh, ongoing north and northwest of Avdiivka. So basically, now we know that since the beginning, despite what some mappers have been saying, the kilometer 437 was never lost. That the movement towards Keramik and Novokalinove was steady. It was the grind with losses, and the movements towards Stepovich is the same. Stepova is still clear despite whatever he's saying. Whoever is saying that Stepova is shared, it's not true. Troops have tried to attack the locality multiple times with Bradleys, heavier assets, and with lighter assets. There was a Russian senator or a Humvee accompanied by something more armored that got blown up by artillery, and then another support vehicle tried to move from Berdishi to Stepova, got also hit by artillery or FPVs. I already included the geolocation of both episodes. So after a small recap over Ocheretine, over what Ocheretine means, we're gonna jump straight to the subject, which is Pokrovsk. Ocheretine is a very good place for the Russians to have their first tactical pause in this advance towards the northern Donbass. Not because it's demanded by the losses. The losses are there. I'm not gonna start. You know, we are never lying at the Team War Criminal Crew, but in this case, the losses are nowhere near what is being pretended. They are, however, important for the area at hand, so basically western Avdiivka. And why I would like for the Russians to, once they get the Ocheretine spot and start threatening Alexandrivka, because as I explained last time, there are two important clusters of fortifications southwest of Ocheretine and northeast, which are going to make life extremely difficult. For people who might remember from last year in Lugansk, there was this position 29 that took for ages, over 2 months, to be completely destroyed, and over 30 to 40 Ukrainians that were defending the positions. You had steel bells, hardened fortifications, so on. It took like 2 months to just raise that shit to the ground. I think the same is going to happen with those two positions, one at Sokol, the other at Kalinove. Therefore, uh, if those two are taken and there is a small operational pause for the winter around end of January, in order for the rest of the guys to set up a logistical chain, it would be perfect. And then it could also, and we're not speaking about weeks, months. We are speaking about 3 to 5 days in order for the Russians to see where they are, both ordnance side and manpower side. Now, the very important and interesting fact, as I said, is that once Ocheretini is taken and Novo Alexandrivka is threatened, Ukrainians, due to the overall topography, would pull back from Novo Alexandrivka if they're smart. We know they're generally not smart, not because they want to be stupid, but simply because they are in a war. And I don't know if you guys, I'm going to make a small shout here to Big Serge. If you have read his Substack piece on the Franco-Prussian War and what it meant for generally the wars in Europe, you should because the correlation is extremely strong. Now, I would have also added that the popular war that Serge is speaking about is also due to French mobilization a bit earlier during the First Republic. But what he said is a perfectly well relayed and concise and clear. So please go to a Lost Armor, read that piece because it means a lot for this war. Basically, as Serge wrote, Ukraine chose a mobilization war, guerre à outrance, as Serge writes in the article, while Russia was there for a negotiation type of war, basically guerre de cabinet or guerre en dentelle, as it was called in the 18th century. So lace war. All this stuff, once again, is just a digression. I'm gonna jump right into it for Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk is the most important piece right now for Russia. It's an important hub, as I said. It's a very important defensive stronghold, given that it has a lot of backfield behind it. So basically, if you want to supply Pokrovsk, you have multiple possibilities. It gets a little bit more concerning if you want to supply places like Konstantinovka or Drushkovka, but Pokrovsk is way too well endowed with roads, inroads, and of course it has a railroad. So my idea for Pokrovsk as a preliminary point would be to completely take out the rail tracks about 20 kilometers from Pokrovsk. This is possible if, as I said, we follow up on the Ocheretine thread and that the Russians are at Karlivka. Pokrovsk is only 20 kilometers from the front line, 22 actually. So you can use things like Uragans or even Tornado / Smerch, and it would be perfect. You can also use UMPKs because you can still have that 40 kilometers buffer behind it. So that also becomes very interesting. What you cannot use for the moment would be the helicopters, which would help with artillery from the short line. Once again, the biggest point over Pokrovsk is not taking it immediately. It's rendering irrelevant for transportation, supplies, and staging. If Pokrovsk is under fire, most of the time, Ukrainians are going to start slowly pulling out of it. You remember two trains were attacked in Pokrovsk. One was with a echelon of tanks, another was with ammunition. Those were probably one of the first images of actual real work for the Russians, and it was pretty well received and was also pretty well done. Now, the situation with Pokrovsk, once it gets within 20 kilometers, is that a lot of artillery systems can start hitting it. Peons, longer range grads, because that's the thing we know for a fact now, because the Russian Ministry of Defense has shown Arash missiles from Iran, rockets from Iran for the grad 122 millimeters, and Tornado G 122 millimeters multiple rocket launcher system, which are between 30 and 40 kilometers of range. And then you can even, by being a bit more imaginative, start putting MSIS M2s or simple, given that their max range is between 25 and 29 kilometers. So you could even use Krasnopol in the approach of the city, rendering it very difficult to defend. Now, if Pokrovsk is threatened, we have this discussion with people from TWK. For sure, what's going to happen is a long-range strike capability added to Ukraine ASAP. Like I'm telling you guys, we are going to see so much HIMARS and ATACMS and scabs and storm shadows and whatever you want if Pokrovsk is threatened, because it's literally the Gordian knot. If Pokrovsk fails, then you have to do a huge detour by road and an even bigger detour by rail. I already explained this in multiple threads. Pokrovsk is literally the end all of the nervous system in the rest of the Donetsk Oblast. Now, where Pokrovsk is problematic for the Russians, and this is something I'm gonna show from the map, is that it has a lot of free range in front of it, and it's a bit what we're going to discuss also for Ugledar by the north. Basically, are empty fields. Now, until I'd say last year November, empty fields for the Russians were a death sentence. They were a death sentence because Ukrainians had mostly pre-dialed situations. They had enough ammunition and intelligent ammunition, smart ammunition, to be able to hit them over the ground. Most of the time, the road network in Ukraine made it extremely difficult to move rapidly with multiple approaches. And I said this multiple times. One of the main failures of the Russian offensive up north, although per se it was more of a pressure tool, was that the Russians were very quickly corralled into main roads in order to move fast, so big arrow offensive, if you want to call it, while Ukrainians had a lot of, first of all, knowledge of the terrain, but a lot of backfield, so they could converge through multiple paved roads and side roads that the Russians simply couldn't do if they wanted to go fast. And once you get spread and get bogged down in different directions on the Russian side, well, it happened what happened. You have huge losses, and you facilitate also the kind of counter-insurgency approach that the Ukrainians partially adopted early on the war. Now, why is it so complicated to approach Pokrovsk? If you see, the main problem for Pokrovsk is that per se the city is again on a ridge, very similar to Avdiivka, but it has also a huge depression in front of it, and south of it, it has the Solona River with a couple of river reservoirs through Petrivka, Grigorivka, and Selidove, which means that if you want to attack Pokrovsk from the east, so basically the M04, you are going to have to overcome all these natural obstacles. And if you check it properly, if you check the map, let's say that you are beyond Ocheretine and are pushing, you're gonna see that Novoselivka Persha is on a edge on, and then after it you got the depression uh, just before Vovche, got another depression at Mezhove, and got a higher point in Komishivka. Then it got Ptishe, Zavitne, Novozelanie. All those are passing through small valleys. So it's the perfect place to corral you. That's what exactly I said. If you push towards Karlovka Reservoir from the M4 and you go to the line Progress, Ptishe, Kalinove, Karlovka, I'm going to make maps, guys, don't you worry. You can see that it is literally a very good natural barrier for the moment for this push from Avdiivka. So basically, if the Russians push until there, Pokrovsk is already under threat. It's not ready to fall, quite not, but it's a very good demarcation line, natural barrier for both sides for the moment to spend the winter. And if you want to go from that goal line, so the Komishivka, Vovche, Ptisha, and Kalinove point, and want to progress along the M4 towards the E50, you have an uphill battle over that line with multiple choke points for you. So first of all, the first choke point is a complete azimuth and a kill zone. Once you pass through Vovche, you see the reservoir. The only passage that you have is a small road with a bridge that goes from Zelanye to Novoselivka Persha. The gap there to kill your ass for the Russians is about 800 meters. So in order for you to pass over the valley, through the bridge, onto a uphill battle, is that you are going to get murdered. If nothing is done to disable whatever positions you're going to have around Zelane. So it's going to take time. However, if once you get on the same plateau level as them, Zelane is in danger because behind it, Sergivka is separated by another railroad. And in order to go beyond it, you are going to start getting corralled, as I said, between Sergivka and Novozelanie. And then you're going to have another depression towards Orlivka. So for the Ukrainians, it's going to be just the same what's happening right now in Avdiivka. They need not to get knocked out from the higher points and lose these two cities, so Zelanie and Novozelanie. If they lose those two, everything from there down to Krasny Yar and then Sukny Yar and then Pokrovsk is under level. Not by much, between 15 and 30 meters, but because it's so open and you got all these depressions, the tables are turned. However, as I said, for the Russians to pass through that area, if they want to pass to Zelania, which would be a bit suicidal, but it's the easiest way to go through, because you got two major reservoirs between Skuchne and Vovche. The passage is at Mezhove that has already been visited by Russian long-range rocket artillery. Then you got unfortunately, as I said, for the Russians, you got really a killing funnel. If they're fast enough, if the UMPKs work and they pass through and they can surge behind the two hills, then it's perfect. But as I said, this is going to be an uphill battle with a lot of losses, in my opinion. In my opinion, a lot more than Avdiivka in general. So it would take time, and that's what I said. It would, in my opinion, be great for the Russians once they have their Ocheretino, Novopokrovsk-Umansky, Netailove line to make a small tactical pause, see where exactly they want to push, because as I said, you get the huge Karlovka and Skuchne reservoirs there who impede any kind of passage. The most suicidal thing to do would be to pass through the small bridge in between those two reservoirs and go straight to Kalinove. That actually is a good point, but I think the moment when the Ukrainians are going to be pushed at Karlivka, they're going to blow up that bridge. So for you, as a Russian commanding officer, every single option here is bad, and therefore, instead of going through there to attack Pokrovsk, you need to go through Cheretina. That's what I told you, and that's also why the Ukrainians put these two defensive positions at Sokil in this case, and then Kalinove to block the passage past Ocheretine. Because once you get to Ocheretine, you're at the same height, you're actually in a higher height, and you can move around the T0511 as fast as the Ukrainians are going to allow you. But if you take the position and progress you're going to be north of Vovche, and the Ukrainians are going to be systematically on the lower ground, not by much. Once again, you're not at the Himalayas, but still lower ground. That's why Occidental is so important, because it gives you a lot more advance and the possibility to bypass this strategic choke point between Zelane and Ptiche. So the problem with Pokrovsk is that naturally it is well defended, and your main bet would be, and that's why I wanted the Russians to go towards Novorossiysk, because it allows them to have always a movement on the higher ground, and then cut the utility of Pokrovsk without threatening Pokrovsk itself. But once, let's say, they advance towards progress and they establish a salient between Timofivka, Progress, Vovche until Vesele, they can attack Zelanye by the height. These, as I said, are going to be a great moment for the Russians if this happens in that way, because then the Ukrainians are going to have the same problem they had in Avdiivka once they got kicked out of the slag heap and North Avdiivka. They are going to have to roll back on the lower ground. I'm gonna post under this thread now. The development, so you can see more or less. So I'm. The point is to go from up north and not go down south. Pop, pop, pop. So overall, what's going? I'm sorry, guys, I was interrupted. But basically, I'm posting now the picture that I wanted to say. So basically, this is going to be the approach. I posted it on under the space so you can understand. So you just can go to the space. The logic would be, once you get to Cheretina, you push through Rodivka, and then you advance as fast as possible to Novohorodivka, Selidove. You isolate the path, as I said, up north from Nova Alexandrivka and Berezivka. And the most important part that you have to do right now, but when I say right now, it's right now, is make sure that the passage in Berezivka is not retaken. Because if you check it properly, you open the image on Berezivka, you can see it's the small square at the exchanger there. It can be attacked from almost every side. So your foray over there is going to be all nice if you can just fire control it. But the physical control puts you in a very difficult situation, both defensively, but also offensively to start to pursue, because you're going to have double depression behind you. So basically, trying to go through it is another kill funnel. For that, the Russians should probably engage the biggest staging force that have mustered since the start of this year. So it's going to be the start of next year. I think they should target about 800 to 1,000 vehicles, which is absolutely huge. We're speaking about 5 brigades worth of equipment. 4, 5 brigades. And this, in my opinion, is going to be problematic, because you cannot hide that kind of staging. And the only possibility, if you look it properly, if you are at Ocheretine, is to spread your forces all over this line, and then still you're gonna have a huge problem, because the advance in Marinka is putting the scare to the Ukrainians, but there you guys still have the Krasnogorivka line that you haven't still approached properly. And then, as I said, it's a really empty space there that indeed it's important for Russians to have, but allows the Ukrainians at the Ukrainsk line to just fucking pelt you while you're trying to clean up the inner field. So to clear out the Ukrainian salient there. So every single potential choice for the Russians is problematic, and I think one of the big aspects why the Russians want Avdiivka to last as much as possible and have the Ukrainians attack as much as possible is to try to whatever they can throw there as equipment, because artillery and manpower right now for the front, given that it's not that big, I don't think Ukraine is going to have a problem to push as many corpses there as they have. One of the biggest threats, as I said, is that once this movement goes through, in my opinion, a lot more big guns are going to come into play for Ukraine, because unfortunately, Pokrovsk is such a big deal in absolute terms. I'm going to produce another map for you guys so you can basically see it. If Pokrovsk falls, behind it you are going to have another low ground. So Pokrovsk literally enables you to, first of all, reconquer whatever is left of the Donetsk Oblast, but also gives you a very high ground on the other side when it comes to the continuation of this war. And it puts the South, so Grand Novosilka. Once again, I'm gonna just put the front where it is more or less right now. So if Pokrovsk falls, the supply lines for Grand Novosilka have to go on a complete different approach, and that part is completely no-go for the defense. It allows, as I said, first of all, Ugledar to fall. And on the other side, I'm going to put both maps here so you know. Tac, tac. Both maps are there. So on the other side, if you lose Pokrovsk for the Ukrainian, first of all, you got a drop on the defensive line. But second of all, it allows the Russians to clear the supply lines towards Grand Novosilka and make the supply towards Ugledar a lot more complicated. It's on the second picture I posted right now. So the whole point, the most important part for the Russians when it comes to Pokrovsk is that it's literally a Gordian knot. Whatever you want to do, attack Ugledar and everything, that's a terminal point. Taking over Ugledar is just streamlining the line. But Pokrovsk is your biggest target once Avdiivka is done, and once Ocheretine is done, and once you can start threatening Novoberezivka. It's basically a huger, bigger variant of the Popasna so-called flower back then, when they could go in whatever direction they wanted. Of course, only two directions were more or less positive, but in this case, it opens that many options. We are not yet there, guys. We are far from it. Like, if the level of engagement from the Russian side around Avdiivka keeps going, it's going to take at least 2 more months to completely clear the Ukrainians from the positions they occupy right now. And then, once again, we can start seeing the threats to Pokrovsk. But once Pokrovsk is really threatened, as I said, Berezivka falls, so Pokrovsk is not needed anymore to go towards by train. You can go completely from the north, and it's only the road that's going to be helpful to resupply the sister cities northern Donbass. then you have a lot more leeway because, as I said, then the Ukrainians, instead of using Pokrovsk as a staging point, are going to fortify it. And it's going to be a defense point, and then Pokrovsk is going to be solidar, let's say it like this, or Bahmutized. But right now, for as long as Pokrovsk is a staging ground, the defense for it, the means used for it, are going to be a lot more important and a lot more strategic. So you're going to have Su-24s trying to block whatever advance, trying to hit depots behind the line so the Russians cannot push forward. You're going to have Atacams being used and so on and so on. But once you are within those 20 kilometers, then Pokrovsk is in the shit. And then it matters not what you want to do because, as I said, then the first line of defense before Pokrovsk, basically Grodivka and so on, can be treated by helicopters, can be treated by Lancet, can be whatever you want. And then it's just, as we are seeing with Avdiivka, it's just a grind. Slow, fast, it doesn't matter. But then you also need to understand and grasp the fact that because the Russians do not have a panacea for minefields, for Ukrainian artillery, for a lot of things in this war, it's gonna take dead people, blood, destruction of material, and also a lot of whining. I'm gonna tell you guys. Remember how the wine was the 2-3 first week of Avdiivka, and then suddenly everybody in the Ukrainian side saw what was going on. Because this is a thing I wanted to tell everybody. Ukrainians are very smart and very savvy with their PR. They fucking published every single video they could produce over whatever Russian got destroyed, killed, and so on. But at no point they gave away the fact that the positions, the first 2 days that were lost, were crucial. At no point you could read that. At no point, unless Butuzov started saying, Stensov as well, started saying, we have a problem, we don't have protection, and we lost this and that and that and that, then you knew that the fucking game was up. And this is where I want to go with this. The biggest problem that we have right now on the PR is that we will need to weather that first blow when Avdiivka falls or Cheretine is under control, and then you got the next step. Because unfortunately, as I'm saying, for the Russian side, it's extremely complicated to rapidly advance without losses. It was complicated when the operation theater in Ukraine was pristine. So when they did these super zooms across Kherson, when they crossed the bridge, took Kherson in 3-4 days, advanced very fast towards Nikolaev and so on. This speed racing, this blitz was already difficult then. Now imagine after 2 years of combat, even more, because when we're gonna be there, it's gonna be more than 2 years. So this is what I'm saying. Now, as an analysis, as I said, 4 to 5 brigades are going to be needed. 2 of them need to spearhead this combat. Whatever you think about it, it will have to be fresh brigades. So people who are going to be a bit like the Ukrainian side for Zaporozhye, uh, coalesced around the backbone of experienced fighters who know what they're doing and a lot of fucking drones. FPVs, uh, suicide drones like Lancets or whatever they're gonna come up with. But one of the biggest situation needs to be addressed. UCAVs need to be used, especially if you want to go through the Karlovka line, because there is no way you are going to manage past Karlovka without help from the sky. And I'm not speaking just Zala and Lancets. I'm literally speaking whatever you want to throw at them. Shaheeds, Orions, it doesn't matter. Even if you lose 10 Orions by every strike, you lose one. It's necessary. It's necessary because that strong point is, in my opinion, what is going to decide the battle for Pokrovsk. If you go past Ocheretine, attack Vovcha from the north, it's perfect and it gives you a lot more room to play, but it's still only one direction. So you're gonna have what Ukrainians did rather fast. They're gonna send more meat and more material to try and stop you. But if you attack from the hardest point, as I said, on the lower valley, because you are dominating the skies, despite the losses, I'm not speaking about losing planes. I'm literally speaking about losing UCAVs, which should be normal by now. Then at some point, Ukrainians are going to understand that Pokrovsk is lost. They already know Avdiivka is lost. What they're doing right now, they're stalling because they want to know where can they, with what they have at their disposal right now, try and stop the Russians. I said if I was the Ukrainians, I would try to stall as much as I can, and the Karlivka line would be my line. Because then you can rely on both your two fortifications, as I said, around Orcheretine, and then you can have your natural barriers and the mud season coming back for the spring. And if Ukrainians think like that, then it's a easy win for the Russians in terms of territory. But it means that later on, the situation is going to be dire. Because then Ukrainians would have enough time to put themselves into defensive positions, and then you're going to have to restart the whole Zaporozhye shit show again, or the Avdiivka shit show, you want to call it as you wish. But most important part is right now, Ukrainians do not seem able to stop the Russians on their grind or on their pushes. Don't forget that all this goes along with corrections. I'm going to post you something. Apparently, Russians have pushed back into Mirne in Zaporozhye, and Russians are pushing up north and pushing around the Oskil. They even crossed the oblast border between Kharkov and Lugansk, I think, again. So all this stuff, I'm going to tell you, shows exactly where we're heading for the moment. There is an exhaustion moment on the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainians know that they have to give a real actual winter counteroffensive on the Russian side, which is a minimum 2 more months now. And in 2 more months, everything can change, especially as I said, if Avdiivka crumbles, then you have this problem where either you don't have time to prepare your defenses, or you're going to lose a lot of people trying to evacuate Avdiivka, because we already saw pictures on both sides. We know that the Russians are going to take over Severny within a week, and we know that Ukrainians are literally now mostly in defense around Lastochino and around the northern corner of Lastochino behind the coke plant. And they also have Bradleys and other troop carriers within the coke plant. You saw two of them getting hit, and they're also avoiding this huge backfield on the back. So all this situation makes it, in my sense, a very interesting proposal for the Russians, especially up north. And therefore, the point is to squeeze the Ukrainians out, if possible. If possible. So more that would be all for Pokrovsk right now. I'm going to be a bit more thorough on the actual map thread, but basically 4 takeaways. Pokrovsk has a huge problem because you got only 2 options to attack it. One is through the rail road, so Ocheretine. And the second one is through the valleys behind the Karlovka line. There, as I explained to you, is the perfect kill zone for the Ukrainians, unless you use huge firepower and means that the Russians so far haven't been using except for the beginning of the war. Therefore, that could allow you to move on both directions, from above and from beneath. And in my opinion, that is going to cost you whatever you want, given there are real choke points on those two areas. It's going to cost you a lot more than Avdiivka. And I put, in my opinion, the level of forces needed for this operation just to approach Pokrovsk, not to get it, because Pokrovsk is still a big city. It used to be 60,000 inhabitants strong. Now there should be about 30,000, but still the area is huge, and it has a internal separation through a small river. So overall, as I said, Pokrovsk has big advantages as a defensive point, if it becomes a hedgehog city. But if it wants to remain a turning point and a supply point for Ukrainians, then whatever the Russians do and come within 20 kilometers of that place, then it's game over. Then that place cannot be sustained as a staging point and as a passing point for supplies up to the sister cities Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkovka, and Konstantinovka. And if Pokrovsk falls within the next year, then for all purposes, as I said, the war is done, because the logistical nightmare that starts for Ukrainians in order to be able to defend all over the line, so past Pokrovsk, is not that much of a problem if you don't have Donetsk Oblast. But if you still have Donetsk Oblast, then you have a problem. If you still have Kramatorsk and Slovyansk, then defending those points becomes a burden. So therefore, if Pokrovsk falls after Konstantinovka, then it's just a domino effect. That was it, guys. If you want to intervene, I'm going to keep it rather short. And I'm going to then go back to maps and give you something more decent than the horrible stuff that I made quickly on Google Maps. It's up to you guys. And sorry for interruption. I don't know what happened. So if you want to intervene, it's up to you guys. Go on, Snake. Yeah. I don't know what happened. You remember we said to each other that this fucking site is going downhill, and it's like every time I try to make a space, something happens. It cuts, or I lose. I don't know. It's not even data because I'm on my Wi-Fi. So I don't know. I have no idea. I'm really sorry for that. I'm going to re-listen to what I said, and I'm gonna put a small addendum by Scripta later on with the proper maps. Sorry, go on. I'm sorry, man.
Oh, that's all. I mean, I just also want to say just briefly that news that's going around with Seymour Hersh talking about how there's secret negotiations with the generals behind everyone's backs. I mean, I wish people would stop reposting that because it's complete. It sounds like complete hogwash. And honestly, like this is. I mean, this is just where the issue with Hersh is like he listens to U.S. government insiders, and the U.S. government insiders have their own agenda, or they may not know the whole story. I mean, this is like when he said the Prigozhin was killed because he was doing incursions into Poland. I mean, this is all just like just. I mean, for the Z side, just please stop reposting that, please.
Yeah, and also I don't know if you have seen the trend lately. A lot of the Gherkinian doomers are reposting this shit that Krylov wrote about 5 years ago about how Russia is only allowed to do that much because it's under Masonic U.S. Jewish whatever. I'm like, a lot of this sphere is completely unfucking hinged, and therefore, when Hirsch comes with that so-called peace negotiation, which, by the way, is still happening. It's happening not because both sides want peace, but it's happening because the Ukrainians right now want a breather, and the Russians are smelling blood. So, in my opinion, it's the table's turn. Remember when the U.S. was trying to convince Zelensky to basically pretend to be interested in the peace negotiations in order to tactically win time or stall for stuff. Well, the Russians are, in my opinion, doing the same by saying, okay, guys, what exactly do you want? What can we do for you? And then you see where exactly the weakness is. But on that part, I also don't think that it's that much serious because the Russians can exactly see where the weakness is. Ukrainians, for some reasons, trust their own con, and that as well. The West thought that for some magical happening, the Russians would flee or would not be able to sustain the onslaught. Turns out that the miscalculation after 2013 and 14 was even bigger in 2023. And now the Russians, whatever losses they have, they do not seem to be phased or unfazed when it comes to the pushes. And we are literally seeing, as I said, a proper winter offensive which is coalescing around three main axes. So they are trying to grab whatever they can in Kupiansk. They are pushing back in Svatovo, and then the most important part is that Avdiivka is turning to be an absolute shit show, with the Ukrainians apparently for some reason having completely forgotten that they were in a salient there, and also Bahmut. It's for the first time in like since the beginning of the war, the Russians are gonna take Bogdanivka, man. Like, remember all the doomers and the idiots that were standing Prigozhin? I was part of that thing, but not at the same level. Who said that the Wagner was the only true force who could fight? Well, Wagner never reached Bogdanivka, and then now the Ukrainians are so depleted that fucking Mobiks are marching over them, just walked in through by artillery. So yeah, sorry for the small rant, but I really needed this one out, and you know as well as me, because you had huge issues with the privatization of Russian military machine, and obviously it seems that while some traces of that privatization and the way it's being handled are still there, at least this fiefdom war between Prigo, Wagner, and the Ministry of Defense is gone. Kremlin, go on, man.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of add a little bit on top of what Snake was saying. Like, obviously, there's gonna be any negotiation that involves Ukraine being part of NATO. Like, that's the whole reason why this whole thing started. And right now, the Russians are not in that same situation they were in in March 2022, when they basically had like 160K troops altogether, and the Ukrainians basically outnumbered them. What was it, like 5 or 6 to 1? That's not the case anymore, and shit's going down for Ukraine. I mean, you can actually see that Russians are starting to kind of like heat up the engine. They're starting to get into actual war mode. Yeah, the Ukrainians keep trying to do all this bullshit, like some sabotage over here, over there. But at the same time, they're also getting kicked in the ass. Like the fact that Budanov's wife was poisoned, right?
Yeah.
It kind of shows you that they can get to you. They can get to you if they want. And obviously there's not going to be any fucking negotiation. This is just some bullshit US psyop, because everyone kind of knows that Hirsch was right about Nord Stream, so they're trying to probably feed him some disinfo about some negotiations taking place. This is bullshit. The only negotiations that are going to take place is basically the Russians going to say, this is what you have to do, and the Ukrainians just signed it. Yeah, boss, whatever you say.
Yeah, once again, on the bottom of this discussion, I do not think that the Russians right now are interested in any kind of negotiations, unless, once again, I said, it's just a basically a misleading tactic to see exactly what Ukrainians want, because you learn a lot of things. It's exactly what the Ukrainians did to the Russians, basically at the end, at the early stages of the war. They knew exactly what the Russians wanted. Everybody, Arakamian was the first to accept this. We just wanted to know until where they were going to go. And then once, like, we learned that these guys weren't ready for a large war, mentally and militarily as well, they just like try to get as much advantage of that. And I cannot believe that the Russians made that mistake, but then they did it. Also, they did it because they had what they thought they wanted and they needed from Ukraine at that point, which was, as I say, southern corridor, the Black Sea completely locked because back then they were at the door steps of Nikolaev. So all these the maybe mistaken erroneous judgment on part of the Russian uh, negotiation team could be understandable and explained. But as you said, right now it's a completely different affair. I'm gonna take over. Or what Serge said in the beginning was a cabinet war. Now it has gone to a war to the finish that Ukrainians chose. By the way, what it was chosen for them. So it's very simple. You wanted total war. I said this. Ukrainians do not want this. They shouldn't be wanting this because they just don't have the human resource and any other resource to be able to sustain it for as long as it's needed. And now, when you see where everybody is, you have these absolute. I mean, the CEO of Rheinmetall. These guys should be fucking locked for crimes against humanity and for killing Ukrainians by giving them false hopes. At the beginning was that we're gonna build this fucking factory, and Rebar bought this bullshit. Now Nafoid say that no, they are gonna rent space and put the tooling in there. I'm like, guys, I mean, you're trying to make us believe that nobody's gonna see 12 to 20 tanks a month being built in a factory somewhere in Ukraine, and somehow that factory is going to be so well protected that no caliber, no Gerans, no saturation attacks are going to work on it. It's completely fucking crazy. And when you see what's going on, the cope, the gore posting, the choice of words, you got Stoltenberg on his ceremony of transmitting his stewardship or as NATO General Secretary, talking shit about how Russia is now weakened. And I'm like, bro, this is 2022, maybe, but now in 2023, even accurately, is the second month where the Russians are gaining ground, maybe not much. Everybody's checking them between 15 and 35 square kilometers, but it's still positive for Russia. This hadn't happened since the month of May 2023. So you understand that the counter is over, the initiative is on the other side, the shoe is in the other side, as we so often say, and it's just going to be an ironing work for as long as this shit keeps going like this. So basically, the Russians iron the Ukrainians, even with losses, because this is the other thing I wanted to tell to everybody. You're going to lose more when you have more. You're going to lose more when you're the offense. You're going to lose more when you are going to take risks. Ukrainians just didn't have the tank for the risks they wanted to take for Zaporozhye. And the people who put them in, and I said there were two schools. Basically, you had the US military who asked from Ukrainians to go and die by the fucking hundreds in order to push, just like the Russians did with Avdiivka. Ukrainians, after trying once, twice, they stopped. They said, okay, it's not for us. We're not going to do this. We don't want to lose people and also material, because that was also the problem. It was a very hard and compressive effort from the Western side to give a pool of vehicles and forces to the Ukrainians over time. And those guys just like squandered at least 25 to 30% of it within 2 months. A fucking 8 months effort was obliterated in 2 months, and then they did the other mistake. I already spoke about this. You already know. They spread their forces, and they wanted absolutely Bahmut. And the more I think about it, the more for the Ukrainian side, Bahmut wasn't strategic, because behind it there is nothing. You're just gonna grind over and over and over again. But for the Russians, it is strategic because it's the follow-up of the road, and it blocks Konstantinovka from the east. So once again, the biggest trouble that we have here is that the Ukrainians, for some reason, I don't know who pumped them full of opium, probably Zelensky and co. But they chose always, every time, the worst option in here, because I have this feeling that on top of, as Serge said, this uh, uh, national narrative writing war that they're waging right now, and Serge said perfectly, Ukrainians are nothing without this war. Nothing. The whole national Ukrainian myth, and they are going not with Russian-Ukrainian war, but more and more with second Ukrainian independence war, which is fucking crazy. It's completely fucking nonsense. They are installing mentally something that's not there. Ukraine, okay, obviously it's not independent because it's a ram state right now. But Ukraine, as it stands, was never threatened by Russia in its core independence. Russia never said that there will be no Ukraine, but a lot of stuff that is happening right now in Ukraine is going to go. Demilitarization, denazification. Okay, all this was bullshit. At the end, it was just security options for Russia. But at no point Russia wanted Ukraine gone, and still doesn't want it, because nobody wants to fucking feed 30 million people with a failing uh, national ethos. And that's why the war is needed for Ukraine. This war, unfortunately, is going to build a Ukrainian nation, okay, a lot smaller, a lot less able. That is never, and Serge said it perfectly, they are never going to forgive the Russians that. It's going to be full fucking hatred for a while. And that hatred is going to change only if what always happens when you get help from the West keeps going on, which is at some point they're just going to drop you because you're a burden. And we have already seen the biggest issue right now is that the Eurozone is the weakest growth potential for the next 5 years. And the war is not an explanation. What is an explanation is that a huge market for the Eurozone is gone and a huge supplier is also gone. A natural supplier. I'm going to tell you very simply, Europe without Russia is a real poodle. Europe with Russia, even a opposition factor, even a contrarian Russia, is still a fucking huge market. We're speaking about 700 to 800 million people market. It's not as close, it's as big as China, but it's still a huge market, way above North America. And this is the biggest strategic win for Americans. Resize Europe as it stands right now, with a anemic growth or technical recession, is less likely to contest America within the Western world. I mean, this war, instead of for Ukraine, what is happening is that America at least is gaining back Europe, which was having some thoughts of moving away, trying to find a third way. That is gone right now. And this is the whole point where I wanted to come, is that this war is ending a lot of things we thought about. I think the strategic acumen of European elites. I'm very disappointed. I've always said that this war could have been avoided if there was no attempt to threaten a major power as Russia. And I said it. It's not because the Russians are paranoid. It's like, if every fucking single day you start to put more and more and more and more and more shit around your neighbor's garden, and every day you go around and you park a heavy machine gun and say, oh, it's not for you, it's for the birds, and then you start mining the shit, oh, it's not for you, it's for the rats or for the neighborhood cats. And then, I mean, every single step that's going on, and it of course pro Westerners are saying, but no, it's the right of Ukraine to decide what. Yes, of course, it's also my right to protect my security by not allowing you to have your way with your security. It's very simple. If I see you going around with a loaded gun and pointing it at everybody around me, I feel threatened as much as you could feel threatened when I'm trying to tell you, like, fuck off or I'm gonna kill you. And this is the whole point. This train wreck of a political and strategic situation within Europe had never anyone, despite the German attempts to help everybody, despite the way that Italians back then tried to, integrate Russia, had all these projects. At no point there was another option but just say full support sir for NATO and the US. At no point the main engine of the European growth, which was Germany, tried to fortify its position as a major economy, as also a major um, political power. Germans themselves are like, we don't want to fucking get engaged and involved with power politics. And only now, because there is a so-called moral justification for them, they are going after Russia with weapons and support for Ukraine, despite every single step showing that how the Germans see politics and how the Germans see Europe is going fading away because of their support of Ukraine, because of the sustainment of a certain war, which literally is a mirror effect to their own impotence. After World War II, Germany was also cut up. We're not going to speak about Kaliningrad, Königsberg. We're going to speak over those territories that were German ethnically, that were completely cleansed. The Germans right now should understand better than anyone else that if you want Russia to be the next World War II Germany, you have to invest into some things that you just cannot do because your whole fucking economy and social and political system is a card castle, a card house. And this is the biggest problem that I have right now. I'm very I have never seen such a lack of yes vision. I mean, I'm at this point regretting that some old farts like Kohl and Mitterrand went away, because at least they weren't pro-Russia, quite the contrary. But they understood that there was no Europe without the bear. Sorry to use a pejorative term. But now the new generation is literally like, yeah, fuck Russia, fuck our natural connections with them, fuck everything. Let's just quote unquote cancel that fucking country. I'm like, guys, not only doesn't work like that, but you are gonna have a huge motherfucking trouble because you have no plan B when it comes to everything that makes you what you are. And that's what happened. Thank you very much, guys. Yeah, go on, Kermit.
Yeah, just wanted to add a couple of things to what you were saying
Yep.
earlier. Like, obviously, the Russians never wanted to for Ukraine to disappear. The thing, even in what was it around the Maidan in 2013, for them it was all okay. Like, you can do trade with Europe. You can actually sort of have an economic agreement with Europe. That was really okay for them because they would have this sort of backdoor into Europe. They could
Yes.
trade with Ukraine, and then Ukraine can trade with Europe. So it really would have made things a lot easier for them. However, the problem has always been the military aspect, right? This is the what this whole situation is about, right? You can't have NATO, United States, and the British troops on Russian border. That's unacceptable. That's one thing. Second thing is kind of like you were saying about Europe. All these people are basically sniffing their own farts and getting high on it. Like they're Putin gave a speech a few days ago, if I'm not mistaken, and he was like kind of explaining some, you know, um, historical. He was like talking about some historical things and how basically it wasn't okay for the Soviet Union to build this iron curtain and separate itself from a lot of the world and such. And he was saying like Russia is not going to do this. This is what these dumbass Europeans are doing right now. They're trying to build this sort of iron curtain around Russia and China and eventually a lot of other states, right? And they don't understand that Europe doesn't have the necessary resources to have this dolce far niente lifestyle that people have become like addicted to, right? Oh, you want to cut off relationships with all these Arab states and Russia and China because you're all about freedom and blah blah. Okay, cool, do it, but your life standard your living standards are going to drop. Like, you can't be rich, you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Yes. But that actually one thing that the security matter was intertwined with the economic one, because the whole point for Europe when they decided that Ukraine had to choose, so it couldn't have both ways, and actually Russians made the same got the same conclusion. Ukraine could not be used as a backdoor against them, the same way that Europeans thought that Ukraine couldn't be used as a backdoor against them. But the biggest problem, as you said, the military aspect per se, was not only just okay. It's the you're gonna have a NATO base in the Black Sea, in Crimea, and so on. It was also the problem that um, now that Ukraine would be part of a common commerce agreement, Ukraine could be literally weaponized to completely empty the market, the Russian market out of FDA, because that was one of the biggest issues with Russia. If you wanted to do FDA in Russia and you wanted to have joint ventures, you had to have presence in there. But if you establish yourself outside of Russia, just at the border, you have a completely, let's say, captive population, which for a part hates, despises Russia, is ready to undergo whatever mental and physical gymnastics in order to have that European cachet, let's say it like this, then you could slowly and surely pull out a lot of FDLs, a lot of GVs just across the border. And because you had this uh, say common market preparation between Russia and Ukraine, it would have been the perfect storm. Suddenly, you are going to have what happened to Russia after actually it's a little bit before, after 2011, when a lot of GVs that were supposed to happen in Russia because it was such a huge market, and also it had a lot of actually trained and qualified population, they moved to Turkey when they had to build both a labor market and also industries from scratch. And this was, I think, there that played also a huge role on the Russian uh, economic circles. Like if these guys can flip us like a common third world country, and we're already having it with Turkey, we're not going to have this with Ukraine, because the economic side is just the carrot to the stick, which is the military side. So in my vision, what I had is that the following: they start by having this maquiladora system, but in Ukraine instead of in Mexico. They start to completely destroy the competition within Russia. The terms of exchange are completely worsened. And when Russia tries to push back by influence, whatever, because NATO is already in the country and Ukraine is captive, it's game over. So when everybody was like, yeah, but it's just an economic situation. No, the economy was the actual soldiers on the ground. The view deep down, and when you see how they reacted pretty fast by weaning themselves off of a huge part of what they imported as hydrocarbons and other import goods from Russia, it would have been just the same, just it would have been slowly, it would have been completely irreversible and without a defense point, and you would have to fight NATO back then. So to me, the economic and military aspects were not that much different. They were intertwined, but the economic part was far less attackable in a sense when you were Russian, because you were in this world of free trade and globalism. And what's the problem? It's made in Ukraine. Ukrainians are Russians just like you. There was this cynical approach from the Ukrainians and the European side, which uh, made it impossible for whoever was busy with the ongoing situation to back off. I think Putin understood what it was going, and he just shot first. First, he took Crimea, and then he started the whole adventure in Donbass. And Of course, it's slow. Of course, it's not optimal. Of course, we would have liked at least something more definitive when it came to both Donbass and Crimea. But right now, it is what it is. There is one thing I want to use a historical precedent from my country, actually from my region. That's how the Turks did it. When the Turks first started their forays in the Balkans in the 14th century, they weren't successful right away. They had to first, of course, it was a complete different system because it was the Middle Ages and you got these fiefdoms situations. So the fealty would change within years. But that's how they did. They made small baby steps. Then, before everybody knew, you had the battle in Kosovo. When both sides were soundly defeated, the Albanians were completely crushed as well in Kosovo because they were counting on a Turkish defeat so they could cut them from behind. And that sealed the fate for the whole region. And then, of course, the fall of Constantinople made it only worse. But that sealed the fate of the whole region, and it was done. And this is exactly what Putin, in a sense, is also doing here. First, he took out the most prized jewel from on the Ukrainian side, which would have made a lot more palatable for NATO to just intervene more massively. And then the second part, and this is what happened in Donbass, Russians made it sure that the Ukrainian army initially would get soundly defeated, so NATO wouldn't have any kind of appetite to intervene to sustain the Ukrainian army the way they're doing right now. And in fact, when you see it properly, when you analyze it properly, despite everything I was said over Minsk 1 and 2, those were strategic victories for Putin. Because despite the fact that it was not an official recognition of those two places gone, Lugansk and Donetsk, the point is that the Germans and the French and everybody else sat there and took it. And of course, it was just for stalling and everything. But now we are in a process which is irreversible. And without those positions that were taken back in 2014 and 15, the whole plan would have been shit. The fact that the Russians stopped at Mariupol, in my opinion, was very smart because Mariupol, as we saw, was a huge city, and even an ill-prepared Ukrainian army would have been causing a lot of damage. But now that Mariupol is definitely gone and that you have the rail network being established and so on, you can see that without that Minsk agreement, which froze the lines and pulled the Ukrainians way beyond what they were supposed to be, we wouldn't have. So there is also a pro and a con. And this is what I want to say. If you want to see the cup half empty, half full, which is my position right now, you need to give due to where it's due and criticize where you're going to criticize. And on that aspect, the gameplay on the European side and the American side was pretty ambitious and nice. The problem is that their partners, so the Ukrainians, weren't truthful to them. And they still aren't, because everything they're trying to do right now is go through a motion and a system of thought that, in my opinion, is completely destructive to the core effort that Europe and the US are making. Of course, there is also a hidden agenda behind the US thought process and also European thought process. But the problem is that Ukrainians are making it worse at every single step by doing stuff, going maverick, wildcard on shit that you don't. I'm going to take one example, the attacks on the railroad in Buratia. Yeah, that thing is going to kill off your assets, is putting in jeopardy whole networks that you have laid for years for something that's gonna stop the fucking traffic for 2 to 3 days because you cannot exploit it. You know, when you do that, then you push because the supply lines are disrupted. But there, it's in the middle of nowhere. The Russians, without 2 days of fucking things, they're gonna use fucking trucks if they want. They're gonna send an Antonov 124 in China, grab what they need, they put it back. You are not strategically blocking the Russians for the type of fucking logistical burden that you're creating to yourself. The guy who attacked Ryazan, he was apparently an Italian Russian national, and they had fucking cultivated this guy for 6 years. Then they put it in Latvia for 6 to 7 months preparation, managed to get him back to do the attack in Ryazan, and all the guy did was fucking blow a rail line. And okay, there was I think 11 to 15 carriage wagons that were damaged, and the traffic was stopped in Ryazan for exactly 3 days. But they made him, they arrested him, and they have this whole fucking network now. All these fucking PR shows and these Tom Clancy moves. I mean, man, that's not how you win a war. A war is fucking just grinding and putting your finger to where it fucking hurts. Where it would hurt for the Russian side is not taking one fucking anti-aircraft system. It's 4 days. It should be 2 per day. It's not taking one radar out of fucking 4 weeks. It's taking 2 of them per day to cause disruption and a lack of sustainment. On the other side, the losses on Ukrainian side radar-wise are almost the same. So their losses are huge comparatively, and this is something that it makes me mad, because they are so good at PR, especially when it comes to ground forces. And we even I myself, I'm in awe. I'm like, oh, these guys, they're killing so many fucking Russians, and then you look at the map and like, oh, okay, I see. And everybody's like, yeah, but they're going to exhaust the Russians. They exhausted themselves in the counter, and they lied about it. And I think the Americans had a very hard time keeping a straight face after August. The 13th of August, when they took Rozhanye, and then it took like 2 more weeks to quote unquote take Rabotino. I think the Americans had to go with this bullshit story about they need to downgrade the targets for the counteroffensive. I was like, no. You know from the beginning, if the 2 first weeks nothing was done to go nearby the goals you wanted, everything else is just scope. And the second school of thought in the US, there was the Department of State and the CIA, they said the gains are going to be extremely small, not going to change effectively the front line, but they could make the Russians panic through attrition. Even that didn't happen because Ukrainians, unfortunately, are stupid. Offensively, all over this war, Ukrainians haven't been managing to do anything without the Russians agreeing to it. So when the Russians come to the conclusion, okay, we don't need this shit, we don't need to lose more for nothing, they pulled out. But when the Russians have said, we are going to fucking resist here, I'm going to make it a point, every single spot is back in Russian control. And this is the biggest problem that people need to understand. The Russians right now are just trying to put a efficient plan into work because they have so many shortcomings as a modern military, and I've already explained it. Right now, there is no panacea for minefields on both sides, but especially on the Russian side. So you're gonna have to fucking zerg it and kill people. They should be using strike drones a lot more liberally, because finally it doesn't cost them that much. It's going to cost like what, $2 to $5 million. For fuck's sake, you're going to lose 200 tanks each 3 months. Like at some point, you need to fucking think differently, because those 200 tanks at the current cost for the Russians is minimum 400 million euros, $400 million. And instead of losing those 200 tanks, you could just fucking drop 20 drones, and either those 20 drones for each attack empty a rack of 4. That's 80 vehicles struck or positions, whatever. It's better to lose those than lose the possibility to follow up those drone strikes. And all this shit is still not well in the Russian way of war. Right now, they're still going with what they have because they want to advance as fast as possible, and it's understandable. But for the rest, there are a lot of things to be upgraded, and I promised to do a thread, and I was going to use not use but uh, benefit from the exchange with Snake over the problematics of both mobilization and capacity on both sides of the war. I'm gonna do it probably next week because right now I wasn't expecting a lot of change. So Marinka, I wasn't expecting the worsening of Avdiivka, worsening in Kupiansk, the fact that the Ukrainians are down to putting a completely fresh brigade in two different points. By the way, the 23rd is partly in fucking Zaporozhye and partly in South Donetsk. Is completely crazy. That brigade has less than 2 months of existence officially, and they are dropping it in the worst places to be. So yeah, guys, thank you very much. I don't know if you want to intervene a bit more on this. Okay, I have Vasilek. Okay, go on, man. I just added you. Go on, Vasilek. Yes, Vasilek Enjoyer, are you still there, man?
Hey,
Yeah.
wait, I wanted to ask. You said already in the push for Pokrovsk, obviously huge losses, minefields, etc. Regarding the Avdiivka, also obviously the huge losses. You mentioned like 20% recovery rates, hopefully, and I was just gonna maybe bring up that point. How many do you think they recovered already in Avdiivka? Are still recoverable? How many?
I honestly, I'm gonna reply it right away because I followed the Lost in Yua thread. I surmise that out of the 80 or so tanks that were counted, about 35 to 40 could be recovered, repaired, or put straight up to work. That's the positive point. But on the infantry fighting vehicle and APC, that's a bit more problematic because they're out of the about like 112, 114 that apparently have found. Um, Most are not recoverable because they're fucked up beyond the possible repair. So you're gonna maybe have there are 30 and 40 vehicles. One thing that's positive is that those AMN maps, they are fixable, so that part was good enough. But most of the BMPs, most of the BTRs, and most of the MTLBs are goners. So tanks are it's okay. You can have probably between 35 and 40% of the tanks recoverable, which is what we want. Actually, we need firepower. You can literally put a shit box with tracks like the Plastun, and it will do just the same as AMTLB. Let's be honest with that. But yes, where it's very important is to get as much tanks back in action as possible, because the firepower is needed badly for the upcoming stress post. One other thing is that for some reason the Ukrainians have it really bad. There was a recent video of them attacking a fire team of Russians, which had moved past Stepove. And oh my god, that's so bad. That's so, I mean, like, when you compare it to what they used to do at the beginning of the war and what they're doing now, I either the pool dropped, either the barrels are fucked, either there's something else that I don't see. But it was a fire mission, normal fire mission, about 12 normal rounds, and then they fired 3 or 4 clusters. And honestly, maybe 40% of the fire team was affected. And I was like, oh wow, this is bad. This even by their own standards, this is fucking bad. And that's why actually I think it was a mistake for the Ukrainians to absolutely want cluster ammunition, because it doesn't seem to help them, except getting their barrels closer to the front line, so getting a Lancet or a Krasnopol into it. But most of the time that I'm saying that, I've been I know that a lot of people are saying that the Kassetka are working a lot better, especially Doomers, but I don't see it. If Kassetka was such a great killer, the level of death and confirmed kills would be off the charts. Like, we shouldn't be at the same level as Bahmut. We should be at 2,800 and 3,000 confirmed per month. We are at the same levels. In November they lost 2,000 confirmed, 2,111 for the month on Poterinet, but with about 172 that were from previous months that just were added in the month of November. So we're still at less than 2,000 killed confirmed, of course, which was the level of the first month of counter, and it was the level of losses around the beginning of the year until Bahmut. So at that point, we are not seeing the evidence that the cluster ammunition is doing doing good for Ukraine. I think that for the losses in tube artillery and the kind of ammunition that is being fired, I don't think that. I mean, it is ammunition that Ukrainians are firing. So for them, it makes no difference. They need to fire shit. But for the Russians, it makes a huge difference, both in effect and both in counter battery. Because, as I said, that thing forces the Ukrainians to be a lot closer, and being a lot closer means being a lot more easier to hit back and also to detect. So yeah. Anything else, guys? Okay, thank you very much for being here. I wish you a good evening if you are on European time zone, and a very good day for the rest of the day, and a very good weekend for the rest of the weekend. Have a nice day, guys. See you on Tuesday, probably for a double space. The Ugledar, North Ugledar, and Kurakovo, and then hopefully also the one over the mobilization potential based on few select datas, especially when it comes to budget, comes to procurement, and it comes to pledged contribution to Ukraine, because on the Russian side it's a bit more complex, given we do not have I'd say non-state data or OPPO data, because most of the data either comes from the Russians, either comes from NATO figures, which are not always trustworthy on both sides, by the way. Have a nice day, guys. Bye-bye.